welcome everyone. I apologize for the confusion this morning. Hopefully we'll be able to figure out what's going on and fix that for the next one, but welcome, we're glad you're here. Whether it's your first time or your 8th webinar, glad you could join us this morning. Like Pete said earlier, we're gonna start with everybody on mute. That's just, again, for background noise, just so it's not distracting, but you are more than welcome to unmute yourself at any point and ask a question. You can also ask a question in the chat at any point, and then at the end we'll have our open Q&A for any more questions. And you can also hop in the chat at any point, let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from. We love to get to know you guys a little bit better, and then also give you a chance to get to know each other a little bit better, and see where everybody is coming from. So feel free to do that. And again, all of these issues hopefully will have worked out by the next webinar. So I apologize for the confusion this morning, but for now, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Pete Canalicchio, who is a TEDx speaker and award-winning author of Expand, Grow, Thrive.
All right, thank you so much, Ella. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. We're talking today about achieving critical mass. This is session 8 of our brand expansion webinar series. And so I'm excited to go through this. As we've been talking for the last several presentations, we've been going over the LASSO framework and methodology. So we started with lateral, then addictive, then storied, and today is scalable. So this is the 4th of the 5 elements of the framework. And so just to kind of center everyone who hasn't heard about this before, and then to refresh those who have, that's what we're talking about. And so let me go through what the use of the LASSO model is intended to do. So if you're a brand expert, this model helps you prioritize your IP. So as you evaluate and you go through the questions that we're posing, you will be able to assess, okay, if you have multiple brands, which brands should show the greatest potential to expand, and then be able to focus your attention on those. And some actually may be overexpanded, and then you can take corrective action. If you're a brand owner but not an expert, then the model and the algorithm, and I'll show you a link to the algorithm at the end of the presentation, and we'll make sure that you get that in our follow-up as well. It gives you the ability to determine how expandable your brand is. So the algorithm today measures whether your brand is underexpanded or optimally expanded. Over time, as we get more and more data points, it'll be able to determine whether you're underexpanded, slightly under, optimized, slightly over, or overexpanded. And I'm excited about that. Now, today's current algorithm gives about 80% success. And so that is a pretty good number, but I'd like to see it higher, and with your help, we'll get there. And then finally, those not capable of scoring the brands, this stuff is a little bit too complex right now. The framework still helps you determine what's relevant and what's useful. And then hopefully through this webinar series, and we're going to be doing some other things to make ourselves more available to you and more valuable in a, let's call it a meet your needs on demand kind of fashion. In other words, these sessions are an hour long, sometimes a little bit longer. What we're going to do is continue these as kind of an overview or kind of a high level construct, but then we're going to take and reduce the size of the information to give you just-in-time information. You have a question about a specific thing, we're going to be able to help you answer that specific question, and that might be a 2 or 3 minute response versus an hour response. And we think that that will be helpful to you as we move forward. So as now that you know that, as you think about things like that, please share those with us. Share with us what you'd like to have answers to, and then we'll endeavor to try to get those answers to you in the form and format that make most sense for you. So when I talk about scalability, I like to think of it as a form of merger and acquisition. You're merging the brand of one sector with the momentum of another sector. Let me repeat that. You're merging the brand of one sector with the momentum of another sector. So think of those two aspects. The goal for you, achieve new levels of growth and scale to create a hybrid presence, right? And ideally an optimal presence. And when you do that, this can be more powerful and effective than either of those expansion points would have been. And we're going to get into the details about that right now. So the toughest point about scalability is what to make bigger and which to adapt or omit, right? Because scalability doesn't say always grow. Scalability says really more around fit. And so how far will you go to deliver your brand? What are the steps that you need to take to make sure that you're actually delivering for your target audience what they need? So like anything else where you're trying to be successful, brands must have sufficient air cover. So in an analogy where you talk about an army who's invading a country with ground troops, they want to make sure first that they own supremacy of the air. And if you watched any of the recent wars that the United States has been in, I think of the example back in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, right? We collectively, all the forces that joined with the United States, so many European forces and forces from other countries, we collectively went and took air supremacy from the Iraqi army so that we could go into Kuwait and know that we had the greatest chance of success. Well, brands have to think about that also. When a brand launches an extension into a new market, it has to have that critical mass. Otherwise, it's going to be in a position to fail. And of course, nobody wants to go through a major launch and have that happen. So let's talk about what that means. First off, do people even care that you're going to enter this new market, right? That's what I call permission, right? Does the target audience give you permission to enter the new market? Because if they don't, then there's really no reason why you should be even attempting it. You have to work on your brand equity first and get that permission before you move forward. And then if I continue this metaphor of the invasion, has the invading country even bothered to check whether the people believed to be oppressed want to be liberated, right? So the idea being here, should the invading army even go into that country? Do the people in that country even want their quote unquote liberation? So that's critical for us too as we think about brands, right? Even if you have sufficient air cover, if you're not welcome, if the marketplace isn't ready for your brand, then you're not in a position to enter that market. And if you try to do so, you will likely fail. So let's talk a little bit first about the concept of globalization. This is an important concept because it gets all around this idea of scale, right? If you're scaling larger, then maybe you can have a global brand and there's benefits of that global brand, right? So just to take you back to some history, right? After World War II, there was a sense that globalization was born on the wish that economies that depended on foreign earnings would be able to trade freely and openly with others. So what do I mean? After World War II, Germany, then Japan, they were recreating their economies, right? And they didn't have a lot of demand for the products in those countries themselves, but they knew if they could create great quality products, they could sell them to other countries that were thriving. At the time, after World War II, the United States was really growing its own economy, and it was a perfect marketplace for the Germans and the Japanese to sell their products. And of course, for those who know a little bit about the United States economy, the United States, the Americans buy a tremendous amount of Japanese and German products today. And that started back after World War II. More recently, that situation occurred in Korea. I don't know whether the Korean War had anything to do with it, but Korea as a country has continued to grow itself and went from kind of a developing country to now one of the first world countries with tremendous products and services with major brands. So as containerization revolutionized transport and manufacturers began using economies of scale to compete directly for the same foreign markets, the basis on which globalization had worked began to change. And that's important to understand as we move forward in this presentation. So there was this concept of a free trade agreement, right? Free trade agreements are where one country sells its products or services to another country, and there's no tariffs, there's no no sense of a financial obligation over and above just the selling of the goods and services to the other country. And so the rise of the Chinese market, the Indian market, and other parts of Asia got stronger and stronger, and they became manufacturing powerhouses. What happened in the United States is the trade deficit jumped. We were buying many more things than we were selling to those same countries. The departure of production to other parts of the globe, right? So we being the United States, we pushed a lot of our manufacturing to those countries. And in this country where I live, the United States, there grew to be some sense of resentment that jobs were being taken. Now, there may be no merit for that, but that's kind of the way the people were feeling. And so overall happened is a diminished business case for expansion's sake, right? Expansion makes sense when it's precisely what is needed, but just let's not expand just because we can expand. And maybe this situation is occurring in other countries as well. And I would welcome your input on that, given that I'm only grew up in this country, even though I've traveled to many countries, more than 60. I don't really have that core expertise, that indigenous expertise that you have to be able to share a similar kind of story. So when all these things occurred, it undermined future prosperity. This kind of nationalistic sentiment and this ongoing distrust of business, globalization, technology, they had potential to undermine future prosperity. And if we think about it, the ideal world for a consumer is where the products and services are delivered at the highest quality at the least amount of cost, regardless of where they're made, right? So the ideal world is that everybody works together and creates these products and services to enhance the consumer's well-being. And, of course, we have to deal with these issues of nationalistic sentiment and the other things that I mentioned as business owners, right? We have to be aware of them. These are real issues. So where is this seen today? Let's look at the next wave of globalization. According to Martin Reeves and Johan Harness, and these two gentlemen are Boston Consultant Group senior strategists, they said that globalization can work, but it will need to change course to do so. The next wave of globalization could be more decentralized, graphically differentiated, digitally interconnected, right? Gosh, today, this was written probably 2 or 3 years ago, and we certainly see in today's world, the digital interconnection is much, much more enhanced than it was even a couple of years ago. And that there would be a social impact and a capability dependency. So today's customers expect a certain level of attention. Martin Lindstrom, this is a gentleman who's written many, many books, including Biology and Small Data, one of my favorite authors on business. Highly recommend that you read what he's written if you're not familiar with him. And he's certainly referenced multiple times in my book, Expand, Grow, Thrive. He says that he's expressed doubts that the pursuit of world domination is the way forward for most because of the change in customer intimacy, right? So this idea of just growing bigger and bigger and bigger is going to be good for the consumer, in his opinion, is not the case. According to Lindstrom, customers expect a much more one-on-one level of attention than most mass models can afford. And we've seen that, and we live that as consumers, right? We're consumers today, and we want more one-on-one. So we have to have this local mindset, right? According to Lindstrom, quote, "Not long ago, we valued global markets, but now we want to protect our local communities, farmers, growers, stores, and tradesmen. They once defined us. Then we forgot about them, but now we admire them again." And I think if we each reflect on this, we would say this is absolutely correct. And we're seeing it in our day-to-day worlds. So what does that mean? The impact, the death of global brands as we once knew them, right? Only a few global brands are going to be able to continue to persist. And those are the ones that are going to pay attention to this whole thing about being local and being personalized. And there are some examples of that, and we'll talk about those in a short bit. So the scalability of tomorrow will not be what got us to this point. People tend to take sides and argue either for local/regional relevance or for scale. But we have to pay attention to local and we have to pay attention to personalization. So this generates this whole idea of glocal, right? Glocal is this idea of being global but acting local. So multinational brands have pursued a glocal strategy for a number of years with varying degrees of success. And they're looking to marry that international brand and infrastructure with a service model that's tuned to the specifics of each market. So let me give you an example, and this is always a favorite of mine, but the Coca-Cola company may be the very best example of glocal. For many, many people around the world, they believe that Coca-Cola is their local product. When I was, right after I got married, I went to Bali, Indonesia for my honeymoon. And the people there believed that Coca-Cola was their local product. They didn't even know, and no reason they should know, that Coca-Cola was an American company and that it was based in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I was from. And that's how we got to this conversation, because for them, they grew up with Coca-Cola. And so I would say that Coca-Cola has done a great job, in fact, an outstanding job of being very, very local, even though they're a global business. They do an excellent job of connecting with the local consumer where her needs or his needs are met, and where those needs are understood. And that means a variety of products that meet those needs. And I guess you have a number of examples of companies that have done similarly, but there's not that many overall. So for brands to scale successfully, they need to reconcile three forces. And according to Larry Light, and Larry Light is the former chief marketing officer of McDonald's and former chief brand officer of Intercontinental Hotels, he said the following: the reach of globalization with its appeals of coherence, reliability, and certainty, that's one thing that needs to be reconciled. The second is the call for increased localization. And of course, being from McDonald's and from Intercontinental Hotels, he had a very, I would say, lofty purview of the need that these large multinational companies had when they wanted to act local and be personalized. And then the increase for personalization to kind of really get to the need of that particular consumer where they're at. And despite the fact that these companies were global, they could fit that need or fill that need. And so like the lateral factor, there is a scalability continuum for every brand where they have access to the right markets at the right level of intensity to achieve their goals. So if you remember back to lateral, there was a continuum. In scalability, there's a similar kind. So let's look at scalability today. It's about, and I really think this hits the nail on the head. Scalable is about achieving the critical mass needed to achieve critical presence. Let me repeat that. Scalable is about achieving the critical mass needed to achieve critical presence. For each of us, we as brand owners, brand stewards, we must understand how to achieve critical presence and then adapt our organizations to the correct scale to meet that need. So for some of us, we'll rely on our all-pervasive physical or online presence to make the models viable, but others can and should remain much more compact, right? Just meet that need of that local consumer wherever she or he is. And so scalable is about working through where you need to be found and your capacity to deliver there. Another statement I'd like to repeat to just kind of like let it sink in. Scalable is about working through where you need to be found and your capacity to deliver there. So let's look at scalability from the brand lens, which is so important for us, right? Does the brand exhibit the characteristics or attributes to move laterally from one category to another? Okay, so going back to thinking about our brands, do they have the attributes to be able to move laterally from one category to another? Is our brand poised and positioned to scale from a few consumers to a large number, or from one country to many? And we're going to get to a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. Does the brand have permission to move laterally or to scale? Remember, I said this a little bit earlier. It doesn't make sense for us ever to go into a new market if the brand does not have permission, if the consumer, the target audience, has not given us permission to enter. And if it does, would that extension or expansion reinforce the brand's position and promise? Right? We might have permission, but if it doesn't reinforce our position or promise, we should not be doing it. I mentioned last time we talked about the Rubbermaid brand. The Rubbermaid brand had tremendous permission to go into a tremendous number of different categories. The consumer loved the brand, but the brand stewards had said, look, we are going to be about storage and organization to make moms feel in control of their homes and their lives. So we had to say to ourselves, we may have permission to enter a particular category, but that particular category, if it doesn't fulfill this concept of storage and organization to fulfill the need for moms to be able to have control of their lives, then we should not go into that category, even though we had permission. So that is a critical piece that we each need to think about with our own brands. If we think of lateral being the breadth of a brand, then scalable would be the brand's depth. So traditionally, scalability has been based on footprint, right? You establish a beachhead, you gain your orders, and then you add infrastructure to fulfill that demand. That has been the tried and true method that we've used historically. Now, let's take an example with the brand In Vivo. So what is In Vivo? In Vivo is a tiny vineyard in New Zealand. What did they want to do? What was their task? They wanted to massively expand their audience. How do you do that when you have a tiny vineyard in an island that is remotely based from the rest of the majority of the population of the world? Well, what did they do? They decided to persuade Graham Norton, who is a celebrity chef, to make their brand the show's official wine. So hats off to them for being able to accomplish that, right? That was a monumental feat. But they probably had more than one person in mind, right? It's not like, okay, we're only going after Graham Norton, and if Graham Norton doesn't agree to make us the official wine of his show, we're dead in the water. No, they probably had 10 examples of individuals that could fulfill the need, and they probably went after all 10. And fortunately, Graham Norton was one who decided that In Vivo would be the perfect fit for his particular show. And so he agreed that they could be the official wine of his show. And what happened? Well, they gained massive awareness, right? Because his show was seen by millions. They gained a celebrity endorsement. And what else did they gain? They gained whole new markets on a minuscule budget. So they went from this obscure little brand in New Zealand to a brand that was seen by millions across the globe. What a powerful, powerful concept. And my hat's off to In Vivo for thinking big enough and boldly enough that they would go after this particular type of strategy. And they are experiencing the fruit of their efforts to this day. So how else should brands consider scaling? Well, we've up until this point, we've talked about like scaling to gain greater revenue, to gain greater market share. But how about to gain greater audience? Or how about to gain greater experience? Or how about to gain into new media or channels? Those are three different ways, and there's probably other ways that you could think about of scaling that would be beyond the traditional sense of the word. Choosing the expansion mode that is right for your brand will depend on the following. What's feasible? And think about this in big terms, right? Think about it like In Vivo, right? Because each of us or many of us are entrepreneurs and we're thinking, well, what can my brand do? Well, at least we're in the countries we're in. We're not the small little tiny vineyard in New Zealand, right? Who is thousands of miles away from many major markets. The only really close relevant market is Australia for the country of New Zealand. What your consumers are looking for. This is the critical piece. And I mentioned at the start of our conversation today that my company, what we're going to be doing is really listening to you about what your needs are and delivering against those needs. So what are your consumers looking for is a critical question that you have to answer. And then how can you sustain the advantage you gain? How can you sustain the advantage that you gain? So let's reflect on what some others have done that was confusing in the past. According to McKinsey, companies choose to broaden their brand portfolios with variants of the same idea which confuse consumers. We probably all have many examples of this, right? Where you're saying, I know that company, they have many brands, but many of the products that they have under the different brands seem almost identical, right? And so I'm going to give you an example with General Motors, because I believe this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So they have the Chevrolet brand. They used to have the Pontiac brand. They used to have the Oldsmobile brand. They have the Buick brand and they have the Cadillac brand, and they actually have the General Motors brand. And you can see on the left, they have some other brands in other countries. Why don't they have the Pontiac and Oldsmobile brand anymore? Well, in 2008, with the major recession, they had to downsize. They had to scale smaller. And what they were actually selling under the Pontiac brand and the Oldsmobile brand was very similar to what they were selling under the Buick brand. In fact, change the color, change maybe the chassis, change the logo on the car, and you effectively had the same vehicle. So they thought that if they could just create a bunch of brands and put their logos on them and model them in such a way that they fit different markets, they would actually grow. But what they discovered was that was not a successful or fruitful way to continue to grow over time. It might have worked for the decades of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but in today's world, that didn't make sense. And now today, General Motors is a very profitable company without having to deal with the extra stock keeping units, the thousands of SKUs associated with two brands that no longer really had any relevance. So contrary to what many brand owners believe, more brands of the same products do not mean greater market share, greater market reach. Instead, it means, or can mean, greater confusion, more dilution, more cost, and lower returns. So be thinking about that. Probably this is not as important to those on the call today, but those who may be listening later, if your company is doing this kind of thing, it may not be actually helpful to you. Pay attention to the customer needs. Identify and cater to the nuanced set of consumer need states. How do you do that? You got to do research. You got to understand what those consumers need. And then make sure that your products aren't just based on demographics, but really are perceived to be very specialized against the needs of the consumer. This means proper attention to be paid to what those consumer needs are and to fulfill those needs. If I think about the Starbucks brand, right, they have so many different choices, and they've figured out how to do them profitably, right? You can buy a latte, and you can have that latte with whole milk, almond milk, probably whole wheat milk, soy milk. Then you can flavor it with all kinds of different flavorings and different toppings. And each of those has been designed and created with research. They know what their customers want, and they're delivering against those, and they're doing it very profitably. Think about my example with just the basic latte with regular milk, right? That might be in the United States, $4.50. If you want to add almond milk, that's a whole dollar more. Think about the profit margin on that one like substitution of that almond milk. It's got to be like 99.9% profitability. They are genius about it, and the consumer, they're happy to pay. So the trick to scalability is to understand that the best returns have to do with which brands to keep, which brands to reposition, which brands to rebrand, and which brands to remove. And it's important to understand that brand meaning is different than brand architecture. Sandra Pickering, who is an expert brand strategist, says it this way: brand meaning focuses on the emotional significance of a brand for each customer. What do we mean in the mind and the heart of that consumer? Whereas brand architecture is how the brands are structured and designed to form a system. So brand architecture starts with what are the functional attributes, physical attributes of the brand, what are the functional benefits of the brand, what are the emotional benefits of the brand, and then what is that something bigger? When I think about, like, for example, the Rubbermaid brand, the physical attributes are that it's made of rubber or plastic. The functional benefits, it helps me get organized. The emotional benefits, I feel good about myself because everything is in its right place. And then the something bigger is I have control of my life. That's how brand architecture works. But brand meaning has to do with that emotional significance of achieving that brand architecture. Mark DeSoma, who helped me co-author, co-create the Lasso model, says in his opinion, there's 5 types of brands. There is the global player, right? Heineken is an example. I mentioned Coca-Cola before, but these brands have a worldwide mindset and they've been successful with it. And so for Heineken, they're a perfect example of being that global company, right? They are global. They know how to do things on scale, but for each particular marketplace, it feels very local. Heineken, to me, is a brand I've grown up and enjoy for decades. If you're German or if you live near Germany, you might be, oh my gosh, I would never drink a Heineken. It's trash. But for those around the world who've grown up with the Heineken brand, hey, it's a great lager that fulfills our thirst and meets our needs when we have them. So I think they do an excellent example of being that global company, that global player. How about national regional players? They're focused on being powerful brands in their parts of the world, and they're happy with that, at least for today. Here's 2 examples. The first one, Cheetah Mobile. They're free mobile security software. The second one, Hisense. They provide white goods and electronics like TVs and tablets. So these are emerging Chinese brands, very strong players in that region. Maybe over time they want to become global brands. But as we've said today on this conversation about scalability, being a regional brand may be exactly what they want to be for the long term. Then you have challenger brands. And they're basically what the word says. They want to challenge the establishment. They're up-and-comers that are looking to fight their way into a position of strength. And I say Virgin is often the company that plays this role. They're the brand that fulfills this role. So they see an opportunity and they'll enter that marketplace to be that up-and-comer looking to fight their way into a position of strength. And if we think of some of the different platforms that Virgin has gone into, like Virgin Air, for example, they've kind of gone in and say, we can do it better and we can do it differently. And they have a strong affinity with their target audience. And so for many of those who've enjoyed them with Virgin Mobile, for example, the telecommunications, may be saying, look, I want more of that through Virgin Air. I'm tired of flying on British Airways. I'm going to fly Virgin. And then you have these niche brands, and they're the ones that go after a particular part of a particular market. And it doesn't mean they're small, but that they have adopted a specialist approach. So examples of this are Whole Foods. That's a brand in the US market that's upscale, lots of organic products, very high margins, but they cater to a certain affluent audience. Then you have Fresh Market, which is another example in the US marketplace. And then the last example is Star Sports, and they're a subsidiary of 21st Century Fox, division of Star TV in the Indian market. These are examples of niche brands. And then finally, you have these cult brands, and they're the brands that are powerful through word of mouth, right? They're known to the people who love them, but they're operating below the radar, and they're proud to do that, right? They want to be that obscure brand that that is loved by many folks, but not known by the masses. Here's 3 examples. You got Dewey Makina, Yeti, and Sriracha. And they're examples of these great cult brands that people are using. And the question is, what is that? Where did you find that? And then typically the consumer will be like, oh, you don't know about Yeti? Where you been, right? And it's a little bit of a kind of an opportunity to showcase some intelligence about something that's superior to somebody who's probably your friend, and you're just having that chance to have that little bit of banter. But that's what cult brands do, and they thrive on it. So if you think about those 5 different brands, maybe you are one of them, or you want to be one of them. But in the words of Mark DeSoma, he said that this stratification may not necessarily last, right? He believes there's going to be a merging of these characteristics. And the way he thinks about it is the bigger brands are going to look to gain influence through a more agile approach, right? So we've seen some big brands do that, try to work their way into these certain little markets. And then you're going to have these smaller brands who are looking to gain dominance by finding ways to lift their visibility and presence. In Vivo is an example of a smaller brand who's done that. And so the way he's coined it is, it's going to be the time for monstrous upstarts, the smaller brands that are trying to get bigger, and upstart monsters. The bigger brands, so the bigger brands that are kind of acting in a very more agile way. And the takeaway, scalability may stem from how brands choose to think of themselves. How do you think of your brand? And then how should you scale accordingly? So there's 5 key questions that each of us should be considering as we scale our brands. First, how should we be thinking about the character of our brands? What is our character? How should we be thinking about it? Why is that important? Then, how should our brands behave in order to mean the most to our consumers? Or reside within a coherent system that minimizes friction and cannibalization and maximizes capacity? Third, do you want your brand to be seen as one of the following: a tastemaker, a revolutionary, a simplifier, a hero, or an inspirer? Or fill in the blank with whatever word you want. But it's important to know what that word is, right? How do you want your brand to be seen? Insert the word that means the most to you to fulfill your brand position and promise. And that's going to be important as you communicate who you are to your consumer audience. Then, how do you stand your brand apart from everyone else? How do you differentiate yourself from the competition? And then finally, what's the catalyst to ensure success, right? How do we ensure that we can scale? This is an important piece, this idea of a catalyst. So let me give you an example with a celebrity catalyst. We got 3 celebrities here. 2 of them are athletes, one of them is an actor. And what do? Well, they help these brands, whether it's Nike or Rolex or Savage, to be bigger than they already are. So they provide this certain celebrity that really supercharges these brands. So you got Roger Federer with Rolex, you've got Johnny Depp with Savage, and so each of these brands are able to use these celebrities to endorse them and make for greater success. And of course, Tiger Woods with Nike has done phenomenal jobs to allow that brand to even enter into the golf category, and then to do it successfully with tremendous reach and tremendous profitability. But more than even that, today's celebrities are packaging and marketing themselves as their own brands, right? And so it's this combination of 1 and 1 equals 3 and 4 and even 5. So let's talk about a couple of examples of the celebrity catalyst. The first one, Martha Stewart. She led the way building out her brand of this idea of effortless homemaking into this Martha Stewart living omni-media. She's been tremendously successful across mass markets and even in some other upscale markets. Then you've got chefs like Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay who've gone, way beyond the platform of their own televisions to be endorsers of many, many different brands. And you've got deceased superstars like Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley and Audrey Hepburn and probably the biggest of them all right now, Michael Jackson. Since his death in 2009, his estate has generated more than $1 billion in revenues by licensing his name, likeness, and music. Let's look at that in a little bit more depth. What's going on? Celebrities are profitable because their huge mass appeal when they were alive is combined with the products that are out there to create success. And so when they're able to connect with a brand or put their likeness on a product or service, it fulfills the demand that's out there for their likeness and to enable the fans of those brands to be able to consume them at the quantity that they want in order to fulfill their needs. So let me use a case study of Marilyn Monroe. So what was the situation? And this was recently. So back in 2010, there was the Marilyn Monroe brand was involved in being on having more than 300 licenses, selling things like shot glasses and t-shirts, and generating less than $3 million in royalty revenue. So that when you consider the power of the brand of Marilyn Monroe, you think, well, that's really infinitesimal compared to the strength and power of the global nature of this brand, right? So the task was to fulfill that demand and to actually expand the model, the universe, to have all the products and services to optimally fulfill the universe and to meet the needs of the brand. So a gentleman named Salter in 2010 bought the Marilyn Monroe brand outright for $30 million. And by doing that, he then reduced the number of licenses from 300 by 2/3, so less than 100. And then he got out of these, I would call these low-level brand equity eroding categories like shot glasses and t-shirts, and then went more appropriately to those types of categories of products that fulfilled the brand promise of Marilyn Monroe. A couple of examples include spas and salons, lingerie, and cosmetics. And so what were the results? Royalties grew in 5 years to over $17 million. And the connection with the brand was grown in such an enhancement that the equities in the brand were much more aligned with what the consumer expected. Here's one noteworthy comment that I wanted to share. So a few years ago, Chanel No. 5 wanted to do an advertisement with Marilyn Monroe. So they found an interview she had done a number of years back and dubbed it over the advertisement. And in that advertisement, she said, they ask you questions. What do you wear to bed? Pajama top? Just the bottoms? A nightgown? My answer, Chanel No. 5. What a great advertisement for that brand, right? And only Marilyn Monroe in her own voice could do that. And as a result of that, success with Chanel No. 5 increased dramatically. So let's think about the key questions that need to be asked in terms of arriving at a catalyst for scale. What will consumers look to you for in terms of making a change in their own lives? What can they always rely on you to do for them? How will you deliver on that help, your brand? How will you deliver of that help to allow your brand to expand successfully? Now let's think about some key takeaways from today's webinar. The years ahead will see a shift not just in how brands scale, but also what they're looking for from scaling. The next era of globalization will need to reconcile new markets, local relevance, and individual relevance, right? Remember the idea of the fact that you have to look at a new market, its local relevance, and how it's customized. Expect the quote unquote the world to increasingly give way to quote unquote my world in terms of where brands need to deliver. Excuse me just a second. Little battery needed. So let me repeat that. Expect the world to give way to my world. The criteria every marketer should be striving for is critical mass. Access to the right markets at the right intensity level to achieve their goals. Brands will scale in different ways. Some will use the leverage of others. Some will change who they reach. Some will expand what consumers can expect. And some will find new ways and new places. Remember, scalability is not just about growth. Some brands will actually choose to scale back in order to increase their profitability. And we'll see more hybridization of character, right? More monstrous upstarts and more upstart monsters. What about the catalysts? Each of us should be thinking about what kind of catalyst can I use in order to make sure that I can be successful, to be able to scale my brand in the right way. Think about the In Vivo brand, right? That tiny little vineyard in New Zealand, going after Graham Norton and the success that they had. What's our Graham Norton? Who is our Graham Norton? Let's find out who that is and use that catalyst to be successful. Remember, the most important thing is that we have to stay true to what we are. If we lose track of that, the rest of this is for naught. Okay, we are finally at the scalable expandability score chart. We've completed our presentation for today, and when you go through this chapter, these are the questions you're going to be asked to answer and be able to score yourself accordingly. So if you gave yourself a score of 1, you would say, we have a very small number of brands that are growing strongly. We generate intense profit out of keeping things condensed, and we're looking for constant and controlled growth. If you gave yourself a score of number 2, you would say our brand portfolio achieves growth by expanding to meet changing market demand. We're looking to keep pace with the prevailing rates of change. A score of 3, we dynamically manage our brand portfolio across a growing number of countries. We buy, sell, create, and discontinue brands to achieve our revenue goals. We judge our success by how much each brand in our portfolio exceeds our metrics. Number 4, we look for opportunities to grow our presence through arrangements with others, such as licensing, joint ventures, project partnerships. We're looking for agreed rates of return from these initiatives. And then finally, number 5, our brand portfolio is global and spread across multiple sectors via many different arrangements. We use this diversified approach to make the most of rapidly growing markets and to counter downward movements in others. All right, so we're at this point where we talk about how you measure your expansion optimality. We've created this lasso model, and I'm going to click on it today just so you can see it. We haven't done this recently. And this will show you, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to do it here directly, but I'll get out of this presentation and show you how to get to that model so that you can actually see how you can score your own brand against it. And we'd love to have those who are new today or those who are just seeing this presentation to join us and join the communication. And if you just text Pete, my name, to 345-345, you'll be able to do that. So I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions. Let me switch out of this presentation and move over to this opportunity for us to look at the lasso model so that we can just show you what that looks like. Okay, I'll share my screen again. So this is the lasso model algorithm that I talked about. It's just pcanalicchio.com/lasso. And here you can see the 5 questions that we ask. A little bit first about what the model is and how it works and why we're doing it, and the fact that it's always free forever, and the ability for us to use this information to help you grow your brand expansion optimality. And the questions we ask first is what industry you're in, because if we know that, we can be more accurate for each of those industries. And then here are the questions. And you can see if we go to question 4, that's going to be on scalability. So I'll just show you that example. Can your brand achieve critical mass in its new category, selective value? And so you can see each of these different answers, and then you can actually look at the scalability score there that I just showed you on the other presentation slide. All right, let me stop sharing and let's see if there's any questions that I can ask. And I realize that we're at 12 o'clock. So today's presentation was a little bit longer, but I didn't want you to miss out on that information. So apologize for not giving us a lot of time, but I'm happy to stay on for as long as you'd like to answer any questions you might have. Ella, did we get any questions in the chat box?
It doesn't look like we have yet, but if you don't want to unmute yourself, you're more than welcome to send them in the chat and I can ask them to Pete for you if that's helpful.
And, you know, I would say, and I'm literally, we're asking ourselves at Brand Alive these very questions, right? How do we think about our consumer? How do we think about scale? Are we addressing the needs? Have we done our research properly to make sure that we know who the individuals are that are out there that need our help? And then are we providing them the products that they need to meet their needs when they need them, right? So here's an example with this webinar, right? And we're doing this, and I'm thrilled that you guys are part of this today. But, you know, instead of listening to an hour presentation, maybe you just need 1 or 2 questions answered. And it would be nice if you could just get those, you know, succinctly answered right at the moment you need it, and not have to, you know, be part of something that's longer than the time that you have. And I get that, right? Sometimes I'll have a question that I need an answer to, and I may go to Google or I may go to YouTube, and I'm looking for an answer, and I see, like, for example, with the YouTube channel, where the answer is there, but inevitably I have to listen much longer to the individual sharing the answer than I particularly want to listen. And so I look at that and I go, wow, those individuals, if they thought about it more, they would provide a more succinct answer for me and for others. So I see a couple of questions or comments in the chat box. I got a question from Tom Ledbetter. What are a cult brand? And we are a cult brand to depend on word of mouth. How do we grow the brand without major capital? So, well, Tom, let me talk about that in a couple of thoughts. Cult brands, as we mentioned, or, you know, the examples I gave were Yeti and Sriracha and Due Machina. What they're promising their user is that they are going to get a phenomenal experience, right? Let me use the Yeti brand as an example. That was a brand I did not know about immediately. I actually learned about it through my son, Andrew, who he works for a major tool company, and he was using Yeti coolers and other products as premiums for his company. And the folks that got them were thrilled because the quality of the ability to insulate the particular liquid or solid was phenomenal, right? It kept things colder for much longer, or kept things hotter for much longer than the traditionals out there. And so what happened was word of mouth spread, and this whole idea of this lore of, what do you have that I don't have? Why is your coffee staying hotter longer or colder longer? And it's that word of mouth that creates the demand that these cult brands create. And so, I'd love to talk to you, Tom, about what is that promise that you're trying to achieve, and how can you get your consumers to help you spread that word via their own mouth, right? When we talk about the hierarchy, right, we go from awareness to trial to preference to loyalty to insistence to advocacy. I'll repeat that: awareness, trial, preference, loyalty, insistence, and then advocacy. And what we're talking about there is a level of advocacy. I'm going to put my reputation at risk to convince you that you should use another product, because I believe when you use it, my reputation is going to grow or be enhanced versus be diminished. And that's what you need to do as a cult brand.
What was the second? First was awareness.
Then trial, right? You want people to try your product. I talk about Costco as an example, where you go into the store and there's lots of opportunities to try different kinds of food or drinks, beverages, because they just want you to try it, because they know that if you try it, you're going to like what you got, you're tasting or consuming, and then that might enhance the ability for you to purchase.
Costco has a nasty little trick. They put things that are very desirable, very cheap, and you look at it, you walk past it, you come back a day later and say, I want to buy that, and it's no longer there. So you're taught by Costco, if you see it, buy it now.
It's powerful, isn't it, Tom? I mean, That is exactly their strategy. They know that when that happens a couple of times, the next time you come in the store, you're going to pounce on it, because if you don't, it's going to be gone. And
it's training me.
It's training us, and we don't think badly of Costco. We actually think more highly of them, because they're such experts in the way that they market and they bring us these products that we love.
I own 5 Yeti products.
There you go.
And
tell us about that.
Somewhere I saw an ad from a competitor to Yeti that said, who really cares about your drink being 4 degrees colder or 5 degrees hotter? I'm screaming, I do.
Heck yeah, right? I mean, I'm only going to drink and I'm a hot coffee drinker, right? I'm only going to drink my hot coffee if it maintains a certain temperature. And below that temperature, I no longer want it. So that 4 or 5 degrees might mean an extra half an hour that I get to consume the beverage that I wouldn't if I was using a competitive product. And by the way, let's remember that these brands that we attract ourselves to, they're a badge on us. They say something about us. So there's a coolness factor of using a Yeti versus some other, maybe even like the Rubbermaid brand, right? A Rubbermaid cooler, like coffee drink versus a Yeti. It's a different message, in addition to the fact that the performance of the product is so good.
Our brand is a cult brand. It's called Kava bars, and kava is a leaf, a Hawaiian leaf that you grind up and makes a drink, and it's very pleasurable, it's very relaxing, and it builds into a culture of love and relaxation and community, and it's mostly generated by word of mouth. People want those kind of values. But how do you take the brand and I can't imagine a celebrity who's going to be helpful in advancing the Kava brand.
I don't know the answer to that question, Tom, but the question I would ask is, why wouldn't a celebrity be helpful? And you don't have to answer that today. You can think about that. But maybe there's another catalyst, right? And so the challenge I ask to all of us, including myself, is, what is that catalyst? What would be that ideal catalyst that would help us to get where we want to be with the consumers that we've decided are our target audience? And part of me, just from kind of what you've told me, gosh, if there was a celebrity that I really believed in, and you got to believe in the celebrity, right? if they were consuming kava, I would be like, first off, I know about it now because of that celebrity, right? You build exposure through the celebrity, but then there might be the opportunity to say, okay, look, I know this celebrity. I know that they only speak about things that they actually try. And if they're willing to try it, then I'm willing to try it. Or you could do the Costco route and you sneak in there, and you get tasted, and they sell 50,000 units of it in a week, and then it's gone, and you come back in 6 months. Alexander writes, I'm particularly interested about celebrities as brands and their licensing endeavors, and was wondering if there are any resources you would recommend to further learn more about this subject or this topic. Well, Alexander, I know you've got my book, and there's several examples that I put in the book. But I don't know anyone particular that talks about celebrity licensing like as a dedicated website. But I know there are a number of brands out there that, a number of licensing programs with those brands. And so you might be able to, go on to Licensing International's website and do a search on celebrities and see who's out there, and then see what products they're on. You're not going to get probably any kind of confidential information on there, but you might learn a lot about those particular brands, those particular celebrities. And then depending, you may feel like it's worth making a phone call, because all the contact information is on that platform, to a particular celebrity agent, and see if they'll give you some time. And of course, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you and have a little bit more in-depth discussion about how I might be able to help. Let's see what else is on here. So there's a question, as a services entrepreneur still trying to build the brand, how do you shift brand equity from your personal brand to the company brand, especially as services are very connected to the person providing the service? Yeah, that's a great question. And I would just look at the examples that are out there today. So who are these, what are these brands that are out there that have been successful, and has there been a celebrity tied to them? And what are the case studies that you could actually conduct around those celebrities? Who, for example, let's look at, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or, Oprah Winfrey and others like that, who have built a brand around a particular product or service that really came from who they were first, and do some research around that. But that's a really excellent question. All right, I think that's all the questions. I'm really thankful for your participation today. I'm glad that it was helpful. I certainly encourage you to continue to reach out to us. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks talking about ownable, and I promise you ownable is way beyond the legal sense of the word. And so I think you're going to enjoy that. I'm certainly going to enjoy sharing that particular topic. It's one of my favorites. So I ask you, what can you do today to make your brand come alive in the hearts of those who experience it?